So earlier I said I had an article that went with that last bit about the Texas non-citizen voting numbers, and here it is. It's entitled Texas Bogus Non-Citizen Voter List Included Naturalized Election Staffer. So, Texas's list of suspected non-citizen voters was so sloppy that among the people it flagged was an El Paso County election staffer whose naturalization party the county's election administrator recalled attending a couple of years ago. The staffer's presence on the list, which Texas Republicans and President Trump have baselessly touted as showing tens of thousands of non-citizen voters, was highlighted in a lawsuit filed Monday alleging that state election officials violated the Constitution and the Voting Rights Act. The error was reported by the Texas Tribune, where El Paso County Election Administrator Lisa Wise said she spotted the staffer's name on the list of 4,152 names provided to her by the state. Quote, "We had a naturalization party for her," Wise told the Tribune, which reported the staffer was naturalized in 2017. She had gone and gotten her driver's license, I think, 4 years ago. Local election officials in Texas have been scrambling since Texas Secretary of State David Whitley put out an advisory on January 25th indicating that the state, by comparing voter registration records to the records kept by Texas Department of Public Safety, which issues driver's licenses and other IDs, had found 95,000 potential non-citizens on the voter rolls, 58,000 having cast a ballot in the last 22 years of elections. Civil rights advocates and election policy wonks quickly noted that such an approach is ripe for false positives, particularly among naturalized citizens who may have applied for a driver's license before their naturalization. Nonetheless, the Secretary of State instructed local officials to vet the list themselves by sending notices to suspected non-citizen voters requiring they show proof of citizenship. Those who don't respond to the notice within 30 days can then be removed from the voter rolls under the Secretary of State's guidance. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton tweeted the numbers, as did President Trump, who further mischaracterized what the state had actually found. And the tweet was, "Voter fraud alert." How's that for an introduction? The Texas Secretary of State discovered approximately 95,000 individuals identified by DPS as non-U.S. citizens have a matching voter registration record in Texas, approximately 58,000 of whom have voted in Texas elections. Any illegal votes deprive Americans of their voice. So, nothing biased about that. Anyway, since then, the list has been found to be riddled with hundreds of duplicates and thousands of citizens. Monday's lawsuit filed by several voting rights organizations is at least the second lawsuit the state is facing for how it handled the allegations. The lawsuit accuses Texas of treating naturalized citizens as second-class citizens and of imposing on them a discriminatory burden by forcing them to show proof of citizenship at the risk of their voter registrations being purged. So there's a little something about that. So we have the theme of the show. I guess you could call it fake news. It irks me to use that expression because that has been co-opted by someone who is very much wanting to pretend that a lot of the news that exists, or at least the critical news, is just made up stuff. They're just making it up. So according to this person and to several other people, I've seen other people make comments in online forums and things about this sort of thing, stating basically like, well, you can't trust any of the mainstream news organizations. They just make stuff up. And they then trust, apparently, the non-mainstream news organizations, who in fact sometimes are actually making stuff up. So that's pretty bad, you know, when you have competing versions of the truth. It's one thing to have complete competing explanations of what's going on, competing descriptions of how things happened, but admitting what happened and what didn't happen. This happened, and here's our description of how it happened, versus this other description of how it came about. That's one kind of disagreement that's pretty standard. You know, you're standing on one side of the street and I'm standing on another, and we hear a crunch and we both turn and we see two cars have run into each other. From our differing perspectives and different sense of what was happening right before that, we could reasonably come to different conclusions about how that accident happened. So that's one kind of thing. That is a natural way that people disagree about information. Another is you can disagree about the effects of something. You can say, well, X happened, and because of that, these other events followed as a result of this thing happening. Now, that's really bad science. If you're doing science that way, if you say, oh, well, he started the water boiling, and at the same moment I had a headache. So boiling water gives me a headache. Just because something happens after something else doesn't mean that the first thing caused the second thing. But, sorry, my voice is very dry. It's very dry in here. But be that as it may, it is a sort of a natural area where people dispute about events. But anymore, the last few years anyway, and certainly as in the Trump era, what actually happens is under dispute. So you have some points of view where this whole list of things are going on. And then you have these other points of view where these other things are going on. And they're not even agreeing about what happened, much less what came before it and was caused by it. So that's why you have the Pizzagate thing. I don't know if you remember that, where there was this whole weird right-wing idea that there was this pizza restaurant in New York that in the basement they were taking children hostage and human trafficking and all these things. The actual fact is the restaurant didn't even have a basement. It's just, a little storeroom in the back, all the sorts of things like that. But there was this whole list of stories about this happening. And someone actually went with a gun to this restaurant and was like holding everyone hostage, demanding access to the basement. And recently the same restaurant was firebombed. And you have these things when people believe something, they naturally want to respond to it in some way. And it's really dangerous when you have different truths altogether. It's a problem when you have different interpretations of objective reality. You see something happening and you interpret it in different ways, and then you argue about that. That's a problem, but that is a natural problem. It will always be a difficulty in human relations because people see things differently. We come to things with different preconceived notions. We have differing perspectives. And, so we'll naturally dispute the effects of something, the causes of something. But when we get to the point where we're actually disputing the somethings themselves, like this didn't happen. Yes, it did. No, it didn't. You have a mass shooting, and then you have people coming out going, no, those were all actors. That didn't happen. It was for some other reason. That's really... Then you get into this thing like, well, who knows what reality is? And you have a lot of people who just throw up their hands and go, well, there's no way I can know, so I have no idea. And they just refuse to become involved anymore. That becomes dangerous. And that leads back to what I was talking about earlier, where this whole notion with the wall comes from, where you have a lot of people just standing by going, well, I don't know, maybe, Maybe they should build a wall. Maybe they shouldn't. I don't know. He says drugs are coming through, so maybe a wall would help. They don't realize that the arguments based around why something should happen are not true, are based on nothing. They're just made up. So you make up the arguments for why something should happen, then yeah, it is hard if you don't know those arguments are bogus. And that's pretty much what's revolving around immigration right now generally. Insofar as it is a topic of discussion, it is generally argued about, I guess would be the best way to put it. It is argued about based on mostly misinformation. There's very little accurate information that people believe in anyway. I mean, there's accurate information out there. There's not, enough people that believe it to form a reasonable, to come to some reasonable conclusion about what should be done. And therefore, people are swayed by things that are being made up, as you can see from the earlier articles. But speaking of making things up, it gets even weirder than that. So consider this article right here. So this is entitled, Immigrants Drove Hours for Fake ICE-Issued Court Dates on Thursday. It sounds like a joke, but it's not. So fearing deportation if they didn't show up, immigrants across the country traveled to ICE-issued court dates on Thursday only to find out those hearings dates were fake. Some traveled for hours and hundreds of miles for nothing, resulting in what one attorney called mass chaos at the courthouses around the country. Immigration attorneys told CBS News that there was confusion, crowds, and long lines at immigration courts around the country on Thursday morning. ICE agents had issued thousands of notice to appear documents, essentially a court summons for immigration court, telling immigrants to appear in court or risk permanent removal from the U.S. It wasn't until hundreds of those people arrived at court Thursday morning that they realized those dates weren't real. It's mass chaos, said Ruby Powers, a Houston-based immigration attorney, in a telephone interview with CBS News. These courts are already short-staffed, trying to clean up from the government shutdown's mess. It's a perfect storm. In an attempt to comply with a Supreme Court ruling, ICE agents began issuing seemingly random hearing dates last year. Immigration attorneys knew to double-check, but immigrants without representation were left in the dark, said Eileen Blessinger, a Virginia-based immigration attorney. There's an 800 number that people can use to check on the status of their immigration cases, but there's no way that an immigrant without legal representation, more than half of those in the immigration court system, would be aware of that option, Blessinger said in an interview with CBS News. Now, let me pause for a second and point out that's the only real explanation they give for how this came about. In an attempt to comply with a Supreme Court ruling, ICE agents began issuing seemingly random hearing dates last year. So that's something we're going to have to look into more deeply to figure out what that's about. But apparently, as I read that sentence, the Supreme Court ruled that they were supposed to issue court dates, and so ICE agents, instead of figuring out how to do that properly, like scheduling court dates or contacting people who could schedule, they just began making up dates on their own so that they could say, well, we're complying. We issued court dates without actually any of them being real. And the fact that everybody knows that they aren't real is just amazing. And no one's doing anything about this. It's crazy. Okay, so anyway. In Arlington, Virginia, 4 immigration attorneys reported long lines and a packed courthouse. Immigrants had received notices to appear but didn't actually have a scheduled hearing. Blessinger said she spoke to one woman who left her home at 3:30 in the morning and spent about $100 to make the hearing date indicated on her NTA. Not only was there no actual hearing, her case hadn't even been inputted into the court system yet. In San Francisco, by 9:30 a.m., hundreds of immigrants with NTAs had formed a line that snaked around an entire city block. according to Christina Reggio, an immigration attorney in the city. Hundreds of immigrants waited outside the San Francisco Immigration Court on January 31st, 2019. By 11 a.m., the Memphis Immigration Court lobby was packed with at least 100 immigrants holding NTAs with fake dates, said Erica Tamariz, a Memphis-based immigration attorney. Rather than turning them away, court administrators assisted the immigrants, double-checking that all their addresses were correct and assuring them that they'd soon receive a hearing notice in the mail. The Memphis court's jurisdiction covers all of Tennessee, Arkansas, and the northern half of Mississippi. Some people came in from 8 hours away for these phony hearings, Tamariz said in a telephone interview with CBS News. It was clear that they had no idea they didn't actually have a court hearing this morning. The fake notices stem from a Supreme Court ruling last summer. Prior to the decision, ICE officials used to send immigrants NTAs with a date listed as TBD, or to be determined. The immigration court would issue the migrants an official hearing notice later, said Brian Kaysen, a Virginia-based immigration attorney, in a telephone interview with CBS News. One effect of this, the NTAs could block an immigrant's eligibility for cancellation of removal, a legal residency status granted to some undocumented immigrants after 10 uninterrupted years of living in the U.S. An NTA, even without a hearing date, would interrupt the 10-year clock, said Jeremy McKinney, a Charlotte, North Carolina-based immigration attorney, in a telephone interview with CBS News. A Supreme Court ruling last summer, Pereira versus Sessions, banned the practice, requiring all appearance notices to use actual dates. However, systems weren't in place for ICE to see the court's schedule, so ICE apparently just made up dates instead. Immigrants were instructed to appear on weekends, midnight, and dates that didn't even exist, like September 31st, multiple attorneys told CBS News. The problem became so widespread that immigration attorneys told CBS News that if they had a client with a hearing date on an NTA, they assume it's fake. In a statement Thursday morning, an ICE spokesman said the agency was working with the Department of Justice regarding the proper issuance of notices to appear. The spokesperson said the government shutdown delayed that process, resulting in an unexpected overflow of individuals appearing for immigration proceedings today, January 31st. It's ridiculous. Hassan Ahmad, an immigration attorney in Virginia, told CBS News that a client, a green card holder who's been living in the United States for more than 50 years, lives in Northern Virginia and was told to appear in Buffalo on Thursday. Ahmad called the Buffalo court all week to determine if the hearing was real. He learned the date was fake on Wednesday and called the client in his car to tell him to turn around. The client was already 2 hours into a more than 9-hour drive. For someone who's facing deportation, playing around with court dates is literally playing around with their life, Ahmed told CBS News. So fake news. I mean, that is the essence of fake news. That is the essence of fake. So the Supreme Court says, well, you have to have an actual date. So ICE goes, okay, we'll just make something up. I mean, and people wonder why so many of us are saying, just get rid of ICE, because ICE, that's the kind of thing they're doing. Instead of doing what they're told to do, they just continue to do what they want to do, basically, and then sort of make things up. And they know that nobody's going to do anything about it because they have the administration and the Justice Department behind them. They don't care how much chaos they create. They don't care who gets hurt. They are happy to screw up the lives of immigrants because that's what they see as their job, and that's a real problem. It's a huge problem, and the next president, whoever it is, the next administration, in 2 years, when we get out and vote, we're going to have to do some real serious work and try and remove a lot of these people from power because they are misusing power. They are not even trying to do things the right way. Oh, it gets weirder than this. This next article is entitled, Where Does Illegal Immigration Mostly Occur? Here's what the data tells us. The westernmost edge of the U.S. border wall separates Tijuana from San Diego. Most undocumented immigrants in this country did not enter the U.S. at the southern border. And they didn't enter near the border town of McAllen, Texas, where the president visited Thursday during the 20 days of a partial government shutdown fought over constructing additional barriers at the southern border. When it comes to people in the country without proper documentation, the majority of them didn't cross the Mexican border at all. Most of them came to the United States legally, but then don't leave. I was talking about this last time. That was a few weeks ago, so you may not remember, but in talking about the wall, this is an important point that comes up, and it should be referenced. About 700,000 travelers to the United States overstayed their visas in fiscal 2017, the most recent year for which the Department of Homeland Security had published figures. DHS estimates that of September 30th, 2017, the end of the fiscal year, more than 600,000 of those travelers were still in the U.S. So out of 700,000 overstayed, and 600,000 were still there after a period of time. During that same year, there were just 300,000 apprehensions along the southern border, according to Customs and Border Protection, the lowest number since 1971. Visa overstays have outnumbered people who enter the country illegally at the southern border every year since 2007, according to a report for the Center for Migration Studies. The report's authors estimate that the number of total visa overstays was 600,000 more than the total number of border crossers, and that in 2014, visa overstays accounted for 2/3 of all undocumented immigrants. 2/3. Think about that. So immigrants traveling through Mexico, of course, take up much of the public's attention on the issue of illegal immigration, and they do account for almost all people apprehended by CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, which include the Border Patrol. Immigration and Customs Enforcement largely works in the interior of the country. Those caught by the U.S. government can apply for asylum if they can claim a credible fear that their lives would be in danger by returning to their home countries. Some immigrants, in fact, turn themselves in to federal agents to do so. Apprehensions of people attempting to cross the border illegally, however, far outnumber the number of people requesting asylum at the border. The agency catches the highest number of undocumented migrants in the Rio Grande Valley sector of South Texas. This includes McAllen, where the president visited on Thursday. In fiscal 2018, CBP apprehended 162,000 people in the Rio Grande Valley. None of the 8 other Border Patrol sectors on the southern border had even half of that activity. But another area saw apprehensions quickly rise during recent months, the El Paso sector. In the last fiscal year, 8% of all apprehensions came from this area, which consists of New Mexico and a small portion of West Texas, including the city of El Paso. But in October and November of 2018, and apprehensions in general picked up, the area's share doubled. The majority of that growth in the El Paso area has been apprehensions of what CBP calls family units. During those 2 months, the agency reported that almost 3/4 of all people caught there were traveling with family members. What we've been seeing over the past few months is a dramatic increase in families and kids, Andrew Meehan, CBP's Assistant Commissioner for Public Affairs, told NPR. You have Border Patrol stations that are largely at capacity and are not equipped to handle the large surge of families and kids that have approached our border. Sorry, can't read. It is unclear how many of these migrants applied for asylum after arriving in the U.S., but the total number of asylum cases has been increasing as well. A growing percentage of border crossers in recent years have originated in the northern triangle states of Central America, wrote Robert Warren and Donald Kerwin of the Center for Migration Studies. These migrants are fleeing pervasive violence, persecution, and poverty, and a large number do not seek to evade arrest, but present themselves to border officials and request political asylum. Many are de facto refugees, not illegal border crossers, the authors wrote. In 2017, the Border Patrol employed more than 19,000 agents, almost double the number in fiscal 2003. And the agency's budget grew from $263 million in 1990 to more than $3.8 billion in 2016, according to the American Immigration Council. The budget for Customs and Border Protection, which includes the Border Patrol, has grown from $5.9 billion in 2003 to $13.2 billion in 2016. At the same time, apprehensions at the southern border have declined from a high of more than 1.6 million in 2000 to just over 300,000 in 2017. Despite consistently high apprehensions in sectors that do contain fencing, Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen said at the White House on Wednesday that everywhere we put up a wall, illegal immigration has been reduced 90 to 95%. Yet, CBP data shows that the number of people the agents have caught has decreased across the board, not just in areas where the government constructs barriers. Both the El Paso and Rio Grande sectors have physical barriers in place to prevent illegal crossings into the United States. Pedestrian fencing stretches to both sides of the city of El Paso and West Texas, where vehicle barriers along much of the rest of the New Mexico border. In South Texas, pedestrian fencing dots the area around McAllen and expands most of the way from there to the Gulf of Mexico. The Tucson sector, which covers most of Arizona and is completely blocked by vehicle and pedestrian fencing, has seen a recent increase in apprehensions. In fiscal 2018, CBP caught about 52,000 people there, including an estimated 5,000 unaccompanied minors. The sector of the southwestern border with the fewest apprehensions, on the other hand, has almost no fencing. The Big Bend sector, starting in West Texas and extending about halfway down the state, is the largest individual sector guarded by CBP. The rough terrain of the mountain ranges and the Chihuahuan Desert make it a difficult place to cross. In fiscal 2018, CBP apprehended just 8,000 people there. Well, that's all I really have time for. I had another story that I wanted to read, but I lost track of it and couldn't find it. So that's all you get. But there again, you see in that story that the notion that there's a crisis, that people are pouring across the border, that a wall is needed, all those things are, not true. They are objectively not true. 2/3 of the people who come here and stay and do not have proper documentation simply overstay their visas. They come here legally and overstay their visas. So we are once again, or still, maybe it would be a better way of putting it, being sold a bill of goods. They're trying to sell it, and some people are buying it, and the rest of us are wondering why we're supposed to buy it. And basically, that's what's going on. So I'm out of time here. I'm going to have to let you go, but I thank you for tuning in, and I hope that you'll join us again, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.